Hi everyone, my name is Connor Walsh, and today I'll be talking about the Dallas Mavericks and their toxic work environment that fostered sexual harassment, violence against women, and no oversight or accountability over a period from 1998 to 2018. This scandal was exposed by Sports Illustrated in an investigation they conducted into the Mavericks organization back in 2018. They interviewed over 200 current and former employees who outlined a corrosive culture that was predicated on misogyny and predatory behavior by male employees, many of whom held leadership roles. Some examples of incidents that occurred over these 20 years involve public fondling, domestic assault, an employee who repeatedly watched pornography at his desk, and unsupportive and intimidating responses from superiors regarding complaints about sexual harassment. The key perpetrators in the organization were Tudemir Useri, pictured in the center, Buddy Pittman, pictured on the right, and Earl Sneed, who's pictured on the left. The Mavericks' cultural issues started right at the top with Useri, who was the former team president and CEO. He was hired by the previous ownership group in 1997, but then retained in 2000 by current owner Mark Cuban, despite previous complaints by female employees about his inappropriate workplace behavior. Even after a stricter sexual harassment policy was put in place, Useri continued this behavior, as multiple women claimed to Sports Illustrated that Useri harassed them for years by making inappropriate remarks, endless requests for sex, and touching their calves and thighs during meetings. Buddy Pittman, the former head of HR, was brought in to oversee Useri, but still failed to hold him accountable. He was repeatedly made aware of these incidences, but did nothing, even directing two employees not to speak up. Pittman would instead send charged emails to targeted employees with his views on social and political issues like abortion, immigration, and homosexuality, causing employees to be uncomfortable coming to him with sensitive issues. Another issue he failed with was that of Earl Sneed, the former Mavs.com beat writer who was guilty of two instances of domestic assault, including of another female employee, yet wasn't fired. The first stakeholder to look at here would be the women who were subjected to this inappropriate behavior. They each had to devote time and energy towards dealing with these perpetrators, while not even having HR to help them, since Pittman prioritized protecting management instead of employees. These women eventually just stopped making formal complaints to HR since it accomplished nothing, causing them to feel trapped and scared. This work environment even brought many of these women to leave the sports industry entirely due to a structure that made them feel vulnerable and protected powerful men who were guilty of this behavior. The next stakeholder here is owner Mark Cuban, who allowed this all to happen under his watch. While an investigation by the NBA concluded that Cuban was not aware of this behavior, he was blamed by the league for failing to create a workplace culture and set of HR procedures that would deter, detect, and stop misconduct. Horrified and embarrassed by his lack of oversight, Cuban immediately cleaned house and hired new CEO Cynthia Marshall to help repair the toxic culture and bring in more diversity. He also then donated $10 million to organizations committed to supporting the leadership and development of women in the sports industry and combating domestic violence in lieu of being punished by the NBA, who was our next stakeholder. Having a more passive stake in the situation, it was still essential for the NBA to launch a thorough investigation to remove anyone responsible and to make sure behaviors like this do not make their way to other organizations. So far, they have remained diligent, requiring the Mavericks to file quarterly reports regarding the implementation of league recommendations, as well as any further incidents of misconduct by employees. Looking at the barriers to intercultural communication, the first one here is severe prejudice. The culture that Cynthia Marshall walked into was one where women were not valued nor treated nearly the same as men, as there was a clear gender pay parity along with the many incidents of sexual harassment. Marshall also pointed out that the Mavericks had previously failed to foster a diverse and inclusive environment, as people of color were not respected or treated fairly in the workplace. This was made clear by the lack of diversity on the executive leadership team, with none other than Useri being a woman or person of color. The other barrier here would be anxiety, specifically that felt by the female employees. Many described it as a locker room culture that reflected a zoo more so than an office, with the actual locker room with the players themselves being the only place of refuge from the constant anxiety they felt in the office. Many feared for their safety after being threatened by their superiors for filing complaints about the sexual harassment they had to endure, and even when it came time for the investigation, many didn't release their names due to a fear of retaliation or ostracization. Here we look at what has already been done by the Mavericks, and in particular Cynthia Marshall, to help prepare the team culture. Upon being hired, she immediately launched a 100-day plan to develop a women's agenda and values-based employment system, while at the same time granting an outside counsel full access to the team's business operations in order to increase transparency. She then also mixed internal promotions and outside recruitment to increase the diversity of the Mavericks leadership team, where now 50% of them are women and 47% are people of color. From there, Marshall and her team have since set up a 24/7 hotline for employees to report any concerns or incidents, established an external advisory council of local business leaders, and implemented ongoing ethics, compliance, and unconscious bias training sessions. While these changes have been very effective in the short term, the Mavericks also need to begin taking steps towards making sure the intended effects of these changes stick in the long term. Their first step in ensuring long-term inclusivity should be to overhaul their recruitment process by investing in an applicant tracking system, or ATS. ATS software helps eliminate implicit biases by utilizing technology like natural language processing and artificial intelligence to both screen and sort through applications and resumes. This will allow the Mavericks to go blind, in a sense, in the review process by focusing on a candidate's specific qualifications and skills instead of surface-level characteristics. From there, for the interview stages, Marshall and her team should then develop work sample tests that replicate tasks that need to be completed on the job. These are typically the best indicators of job performance because they provide important insights beyond surface-level appearances, and they force employers to evaluate the quality of a candidate instead of relying on unconscious biases. To then evaluate the success of these changes in the long term, the HR department can use their normal information system software to conduct periodic diversity audits. These audits would examine personnel data by race or gender to identify any systemic differences that result in discriminatory practices. From this data analysis, HR would then create quarterly reports based on metrics such as performance, compensation, and promotional opportunities, and then collaborate with the executive team to identify any disparities. The final phase of this process would be to implement a communication plan that addresses the culture that allowed inappropriate behavior to run rampant within the Mavericks front office. Marshall and her team are off to a good start with their various training sessions, but I believe they should take it a step further by conducting bystander intervention and manager-specific training. Traditional mandatory sexual harassment seminars simply have not reduced the number of incidents, with 40% of women still reporting that they have been sexually harassed in the workplace, and many men even blaming the victims themselves because of these training sessions. With bystander intervention training, those who have taken part in these sessions have largely reported that it helped them know what to do when they see signs of a problem, such as aggressive or inappropriate behavior, making them much more likely than others to intervene in real-life situations. Then with manager-focused training, it presents sexual harassment as a challenge that all managers must deal with and not just a select few, making it more effective from a leadership standpoint. Since managers are responsible for their employees, this type of training portrays the situation as what they might see other people doing wrong instead of focusing on what they themselves may be guilty of. This style has resonated with men in particular because it creates the perception that they are the heroes in these situations instead of being accused of contributing to this behavior. To evaluate the long-term success of these training programs, the organization should send out quarterly pulse surveys to their employees to see how much progress they are making with reinventing the culture. This feedback will give the Mavericks insight into how well employees are aligning with their new mission and values, while also helping to develop future culture initiatives. Thank you for listening to my proposal. I am confident that these recommendations will help the Mavericks further improve on their organizational culture efforts.